After World War II, Europe was devastated, cities destroyed, economies in ruins, and a new fear rising: Soviet expansion. The Red Army, once liberators, now occupied Eastern Europe, installing communist regimes and creating a buffer of satellite states. Western democracies saw this as a direct threat to their freedom and way of life. In response, the North Atlantic Treaty was signed in April 1949, creating NATO, a collective defense pact. The core promise: an attack on one member is an attack on all, sending a clear warning to Moscow. NATO was more than a military alliance. It was a community built on democracy, liberty, and the rule of law. The alliance aimed to protect a shared political and social order from a fundamentally opposed system. Early NATO efforts focused on building a credible defense, especially as the Korean War raised fears of conflict spreading to Europe. General Eisenhower became the first Supreme Allied Commander Europe, integrating military forces and establishing bases across Western Europe. This unified front created a formidable barrier against Soviet advances and solidified the division of Europe. NATO's foundation was not just about who it opposed, but what it stood for. The alliance's structure and values set clear entry requirements, shaping the post-war order. The early years were marked by joint exercises and a commitment to collective security. NATO's existence drew a line in the sand, defining the West's resolve. The stage was set for a long, tense standoff between two opposing blocs. The seeds of the Cold War were sown, with NATO as the West's shield. The world was now divided, and the struggle for Europe's future had begun. The Cold War was more than a rivalry. It was a clash of worldviews. The West, led by the US, championed democracy, free markets, and individual rights. Citizens enjoyed freedoms like voting, speech, and private property. The Soviet Union, by contrast, enforced a one-party, state-controlled economy and suppressed dissent. Marxism-Leninism prioritized the collective over individual liberty, with the KGB ensuring total control. This ideological divide fueled global competition for influence and legitimacy. The US saw itself as the defender of the free world. The USSR claimed to champion the working class. Cooperation was nearly impossible. Every move was viewed with suspicion. The Iron Curtain became the stark symbol of this division: NATO's democracies to the west, the Warsaw Pact's communist states to the east. The world was split into two camps, each convinced of its own righteousness. Within this context, the idea of Soviet membership in NATO seemed unthinkable. The ideological gulf was simply too wide to bridge. The stage was set for a dramatic diplomatic confrontation. In 1954, the unthinkable happened. The Soviet Union formally asked to join NATO. The request, led by Foreign Minister Molotov, came after Stalin's death, as new leaders sought to appear more conciliatory. The Soviets hoped to block West Germany's rearmament and complicate NATO's expansion. On the surface, the proposal was framed as a step toward peace and pan-European security. But it was a diplomatic gambit. If accepted, it would undermine NATO's purpose. If rejected, it would paint the West as hostile. The Soviets likely never expected acceptance. Their goal was to expose NATO as an exclusive anti-Soviet bloc. The move set the stage for the next phase of Cold War rivalry. The world watched as the West weighed its response. Western leaders met the Soviet proposal with deep skepticism. Years of Soviet aggression, blockades, coups, and repression had destroyed any trust. The official NATO reply was a firm rejection, citing the USSR's actions as incompatible with the alliance's principles. Admitting the Soviets would paralyze NATO, giving Moscow a veto over every decision. The West demanded real change: withdrawal from Eastern Europe, free elections, and an end to subversion. These conditions were impossible for the Kremlin to accept. The rejection exposed the Soviet offer as a propaganda move, not a genuine bid for peace. NATO's unity held firm, and the alliance's purpose was reaffirmed. The diplomatic standoff only deepened the divide. The core reason the Soviet Union couldn't join NATO was simple. The alliance existed to defend against Soviet aggression. Admitting its main adversary would have destroyed NATO's purpose and security. Soviet membership would grant access to secret plans, troop locations, and strategies, neutralizing NATO from within. The alliance's consensus-based decision-making would be paralyzed by a Soviet veto. NATO would become powerless, unable to act against its own member. The Soviet proposal was a calculated attempt to undermine the alliance. Collective defense requires a clear distinction between friend and foe. The rejection was essential for NATO's survival. The episode highlighted the impossibility of unity between such fundamentally opposed systems. The Cold War's lines were now unmistakable. The Soviet application's rejection became a powerful propaganda tool. Moscow claimed the West had spurned peace, justifying the creation of the Warsaw Pact in 1955. The new alliance formalized Europe's division and cemented the bipolar world order. NATO, in turn, used the episode to reinforce its identity as a community of democracies. The incident clarified that membership was about shared values, not just military strength. Both sides used the event to harden their narratives and rally support. The 1954 request became a symbol of Cold War mistrust and irreconcilable differences. It was a diplomatic drama that drew the battle lines even sharper. The legacy, a divided Europe, two rival alliances, and a world locked in ideological conflict. The episode remains a telling snapshot of the era's deep divisions.